Hey, so this is going to be today's installment of 10-Minute Histories. I just watched the video I actually just made for the first time before uploading, and I forgot to mention I was speaking the whole time, and it made it sound almost like he was a singer, he was a pianist. He was a pianist, but he wrote songs. He was a pianist who wrote songs. He wasn't a guy who wrote songs and sang them himself. So that Schubert, you'll find out about him soon. And this is Adolf Koenig playing in the background, one of his best-known songs, and I think one of the ones you hear most about. Cool, so Adolf Koenig, that's playing. You'll find out a bit more about it later on. So coming up next is the 10-minute history of Franz Schubert and the pianist. Yeah, so welcome to today's installment of 10-minute histories. Today we're going to be talking about Franz Schubert, and he was a transitional composer between the classical and romantic period, and he was born in 1797 and he died 1828, and he was born in Vienna, but Vienna was still then part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And his first real music teacher was Antonio Salieri, who taught him counterpoint. And so he had already had a talent for music at a very young age, and even Salieri had noticed his voice, strangely enough. So today we remember him for his song cycles and his lieder. And so strangely enough, he was first noticed by Salieri for his voice, strangely enough, and he was also impressed by his songs at that stage. And so yeah, Salieri took him in for private tutoring in counterpoint, and he fell in love at one stage with a soprano named Teresa Gobb. And something characteristic of him is he wrote many songs specifically for specific singers, and this Teresa Gobb was one of them. He wrote many songs specifically for her, and he dedicated some to her as well. And this, you will see, is evident in Johann Vogel as well, who was a baritone, and they became very good friends. But he also wrote a lot of his songs and lieder specifically for Johann Vogel. And so with his music he was able to create pictures with sound, and we'll see more about what that really means a bit later on. But so remember that pictures with sound, I think it's a nice way of saying it. And so Shubert Theater was a term that was actually coined, that's a word, that was coined after Schubert's death. But during his lifetime they would have these parties or evenings where Schubert would be, and a singer would be, an artist, and you know, their circle of friends, and then they would perform music and play games and stuff like that. But many artists were there, and they would actually capture these in sketches and artworks and so forth. So that's just something that's you always hear when you think Schubert, and you see a lot of these pictures where it looks like they're having a party. So that was Shubert Theater. And so many of his music is actually featured in films. Like this is one that's very underappreciated, I think, but is his trio in E-flat major. It's Opus 100, and it plays on The Mechanic is one movie I've seen it in, and here I've seen another few. The Piano Teacher, it also plays in 2 episodes of American Crime Story, and it was also used by Stanley Kubrick in his 1975 Barry Lyndon. So, and it's obviously it's for piano, violin and violoncello. And something about his tonality that usually there's this cliche that major is supposed to be happy and minor is supposed to be sad, but in his music it almost contradicts itself, or that, you know, notion where major is sometimes a more uneasy and the minor is kind of where you feel safer, if I can put it that way. And so some of his other songs uses, like the Forella plays in Sherlock Holmes, which I think is one of the most recent ones, A Game of Thrones. I think it's where Sherlock Holmes runs into Moriarty or something, and this is playing like on a record or something, and they have like a little interaction there, and they mention that it's the Forella, if I'm not mistaken. I could be, but it definitely plays in there. Can't remember the scene exactly, but yeah. And so a few false facts, just one really, but so today you often hear that he was a short, ugly man, and he was actually, apparently he was 5'2", where the average person was 5'4", so he wasn't really that short. So this is actually like kind of a misconception, it seems. And apparently people, you often read that he was not very well known in his time, and his works were pretty well known, to be honest. He was held in high acclaim by most composers, not necessarily by the general public, but to most of the of the musicians of his time, and he was actually he had met Beethoven. They were both transitional composers. At Beethoven's death, he was actually one of 36 torchbearers, and Schubert is actually buried next to Beethoven. And I just feel something worth mentioning, you know, like Schubert died of syphilis, and he knew he was going to die, but he continued to live for 3-4 years maybe. Where Beethoven was degraded slowly, his hearing went away bit by bit, so it was chipping away, where Schubert went a bit faster, so kind of a similarity there between them, I reckon. But just thought I'd mention the fact that both degraded, the one fast, the other one just a lot slower. And just worth mentioning, a lot of composers, Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, everyone you hear about, they had employment with some patron, some king, some rich family, and Schubert just composed, and he did a bit of teaching, but he really was one of the first composers to be able to survive basically just from his from publishing. And so just to mention a few of his best-known lieder is the Erlkönig, which is, I think, the most popular. And when you translate it, it's supposed to translate to Elf King, but I've seen like some discrepancies where some people say if you really translate it, it's Elder, which is actually like a tree. So the Elder, the tree, yeah. So, but remember Elf. I think that's what, because they say it might have just been a mistranslation from the Danish word for Elf King. And so it uses pictorial keyboard configurations in the Elf King. So there's basically 4 characters, maybe 5 if you include the horse. So it's a narrator, a father, a son, and the King of the Elves, if you can call it that. And maybe the horse, if you count that as a 5th character. But each is represented in a certain manner. The kid's voice is high. Obviously, the child's obviously has a higher voice. The father has a low voice. And the father sings in both major and minor. The kid only sings in minor, the narrator sings in minor, and the Erlkönig, like, creepily enough, sings in major, which, like I mentioned earlier, usually people assimilate that with joy, and it's like this creepy kind of supernatural figure that the father doesn't see. So let's just get back to the story. The father is on a horse with his son in his arms, and you kind of, the narrator paints this picture that it's not like the type of weather you want to be out, not the time of night you want to be out on your horse at all, really. And so they're on their way to like a hof, so like a court, or it could be someplace, you know, he's rushing his kid. It seems like he's going to medical aid, and the kid's kind of is having these fever dreams, and he's seeing this Elf King, and the Elf King is telling him to come dance and play with the Elf King's daughter. So that's a kind of a creepy story, and the dad doesn't see this, obviously, and tries to comfort the child and say, oh, no, it's just the wind, or it's a fog, and those kinds of things. But it's pretty scary, and the kid eventually dies, so it's pretty sad. But the horse's gallop is pictured, or is, what's the word? Sorry, I can't find it here. Well, the horse is represented by, like, triplets, or ostinato triplet pattern in the bass part. You can kind of, you know, imagine the horse galloping. And yeah, so very, very well-known song, the Forelle we mentioned earlier, which plays on Sherlock Holmes. The music kind of represents a fish swimming in the stream, and when it eventually gets caught, there's like breaks, pauses in this continuous motion that was representing the water. And then another amazing one is Gretchen Spinnrad, and if I'm not mistaken, he composed that when he was 17, and it's like the spinning wheel is represented by a perpetual motion in the right hand, and then the foot treadle is represented with the left hand, and then the lady, like, she's spinning the wheel and she's thinking about Faust and how she loves him, and the music like reaches a climax, and then it just goes down, and during this climax, like, the wheel kind of stops, and then it just goes again. So you can see, like, the you know, kind of how sad it actually is. Yeah, so just thought I'd mention that. And it's based on a poem, Erlkönig, and Gretchen is based on poems by Goethe. And so another one of his famous works that gets a lot of recognition is the Unfinished Symphony, and they call it the Unfinished Symphony because the symphony is usually 4 movements, and this is just 2 movements written, and there was apparently a third scherzo written, but this was only completed the piano, well, it was written out in piano form, and from there only 2 pages were written out in orchestral format. And apparently there was a 4th movement as well, but none of it completed. And it actually lived for a few years after, so there's a bit of like discrepancies about why it didn't finish it. Some people say, every now and again I look at the time to see how long this thing is going, but some people say that it was because the meter was three pulses in a bar for each 3 of the movements, which wasn't the convention for symphonies of the time. And just something worth mentioning, a fun fact, in the year 1850, and not 1850, 1815. Sorry, this English, my second language, is terrible. Should I take my hat off to people who know like 5, 6 languages? But anyway, so in 1815, that year alone, he wrote 22,000 bars of music. So 22,000 measures of music. Pretty insane, I think. And so something I forgot to mention earlier is he helped establish the song cycle, which was kind of what you would today call like a concept album, which is like a series of songs that was meant to be heard as a unit, not separately but as a whole. And examples of this is the Schöne Müllerin and Winterreise and Schwanegesang. And yeah, so just song cycles helped establish that form. And then Mendelssohn was actually one of the first people. Other composers the composers that followed him had a large role in his music being recognized, and amongst these were Mendelssohn, who gave the first performance of his Great C Major Symphony, and this was only after Schumann drew Mendelssohn's attention to this Great C Major Symphony. And Liszt was quoted as saying that Schubert was the most poetic composer that ever lived. And other composers that helped were Schumann, Brahms, Mendelssohn, yeah, I mentioned those. And he wrote over 1,500 works, and on his epitaph, his friend and poet, Franz Schubert, I hope I'm pronouncing the surname right, wrote, "Here, music has buried a treasure, but even fairer hopes." So pretty hectic there. And you know his death was coming. Like I said earlier, that relation with the slow, chipping away. Beethoven had it over several years, where Schumann had it over a lot less. Still years, but like 3, 4, 5. Where, but just he knew his death was coming. Apparently, he told the doctor the night before he died, or the night that, like a few hours before he died, he grabbed the doctor's arm and was like, "Here is my death," as if it's seeing like death coming for him. So pretty hectic. And yeah, died at 31 years of age and from syphilis. So, well, he got syphilis and then he got like a typhoid fever, I think he got typhoid fever, and but it was basically as a result of, got worse because of the syphilis. Yeah, and he's buried next to Beethoven. Cool. So I'll just end it there. Oh, damn, I still wanted to play you some tunes. Sorry about, I'm still figuring out the format of this, and I think I should rather just edit than do it in one go, because I do make a lot of mistakes, so I'm still figuring it out, and then I would have known to, play a tune. But this is Gretchen im Spinnrade. Oh, it's not playing. Sorry for that one. I kind of probably was silent there on the video for a while, but yeah. So that's Gretchen. You can hear like a perpetual motion. Let me quickly get Die Forelle. Yeah, cool, so let's just end it there. So that was Franz Schubert and...
Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching the Today I Found Out...
Hello, I'm not Simon Whistler. that was another YouTube channel I checked on. Cool. Yeah, thanks for listening. That was short history on Franz Schubert. Yeah, and I'll probably, the next video I'm going to try and edit. I know I've said that probably like 2 or 3 times, but I'm going to see if I can do a bit, stop, edit, but yeah, you know what I'm saying. Yeah, cool. So we'll catch up again soon.